An Arrow is the Sun by Bailey A. Osborne. Chapter 1. Two Households, Both Alike in Dignity. August 2026. A hand grabbed my right shoulder and slammed me roughly back against the wall. "I've been looking for you," said a voice that was all too familiar. Before I even saw the menacing face in front of me, I knew who it was. My dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail that day, which was good for me. Dirk Hubbard had been yanking on my pigtails and braids since kindergarten. Unfortunately for him, I was a senior in high school now and could punch harder than I used to. Yanking him closer by a fistful of his shirt, my gray eyes narrowed at his face covered with a dirty layer of stubble and scars. For a moment, his eyes went panicky, but he kept his cool. We both knew what the other one was capable of. "You fight like a girl," Dirk sneered, his face a good 3 inches taller than mine. "And you fight like a boy whose daddy's a traitor and gets paid to be a rat," I grunted back. Who cared what Dirk Hubbard said? I was a girl. I should fight like one. "Shut up!" Dirk pressed my shoulder against the wall again, enjoying the look of discomfort I couldn't keep from my expression. He knew it was my bad shoulder, the one that was broken in my first fight when I was 13. "What do you want?" "Steven has a message for you and you blocked his number." "I don't want his messages, that's why I blocked his number." I let go of Dirk's dirty green t-shirt and pushed him off me. I readjusted my backpack and began to walk away. As I expected, Dirk caught me by the shoulder again, but this time I was anticipating it. I spun him around until he was the one with his back against the wall and me crowding against him. "Get off me, Arrow!" He struggled against my strength, grunting as he strove to overpower me. "I thought I fought like a girl," I said with a hint of sarcasm in my voice. "I'll tell Steven and he'll make you go to the underground," said Dirk. "Fine. What's his message?" Stepping back, I stood with my arms crossed. "First of all, unblock his number." Dirk straightened his shirt and ran his fingers through his dirty blonde hair. "He also says to stop talking to Mrs. Ross. Keep your business to yourself." "I don't try to talk to her," I said, annoyed. "She's always pulling me aside after class. You know that." "You give her those puppy dog eyes that say rescue me." "I don't," I huffed. Dirk narrowed his eyes at me as he took a step back. "Fine." I rolled my eyes and turned to walk away. It was only 2 weeks into the school year, and Dirk was already causing problems. "I heard Donnie got it real good in the rings last night." I froze, my back toward him. "What did you say?" There was a gloating look in Dirk's eye when I turned around. "Didn't you tell me that Donnie is the best fighter in all of South Cap?" Dirk chuckled darkly. "If that was true, wouldn't he have won at least one of his fights?" "Stop talking," I said in a cool, low voice. My whole chest was heaving with my labored breathing as I struggled to keep my temper. "What? You don't want to hear about how Snake hit him so hard he had to be carried out last night?" Patronizing. Disgusting. "Stop talking about my brother." "Your brother? You don't have a brother, orphan." It didn't take more than 10 seconds to have Dirk flat out on the floor with blood pouring from his nose. Someone shouted, "Fight!" And there was a rush of feet as our classmates came to watch the scene. No one was surprised it was Dirk and me. No one was surprised that I was the one on top. Same old story since elementary school. Dirk struck me with his hand against my cheek. It stung. Angrily, I slammed his head against the floor and stood up just as the biology teacher came to break it up. "Principal's office, I know." I shrugged his hand off my arm and walked away to turn myself in. The red handprint on my face didn't fade as I waited for Principal Gutter and the school nurse to finish with Dirk. I was thankful for a moment's silence as I sat in the cushioned chair and leaned my head back against the green and white striped wallpaper. My arms rested on the armrests as I tapped quietly against the wood. Another student entered the room, and my ears perked up. I rolled my head to the side and saw Roe Richardson, the new kid. Timidly, he walked up to the desk. Immediately, I straightened, my arms slipping into my lap. After a moment of talking softly with the secretary, he glanced over his shoulder to where I sat. The mark of Dirk's hand blazed on my skin while I bit my lip and gazed steadily at my scuffed up shoes. Had they always looked that dirty? I couldn't remember the last time I really looked at them. Rose's clothes made every rip, stain, and ill-fitted garment glaringly obvious to me. My pants had been my favorite pair 2 years ago. Now they were an inch too short and revealed my mismatched socks that probably hadn't been washed in several weeks. The rip under the arm of my long-sleeved shirt had been there for months now, but I didn't care enough to take the time to sew it up. I knew how, but what did a rip on my shirt matter when people were just going to notice the large grease stain on the bottom right side? Ro walked quietly over to the chair next to me, and suddenly it mattered very much. I hoped I would be as invisible to him as I was to everyone else at school. Hi. His soft voice reached my ears, and I nearly snapped my neck turning to stare at him. His eyes were green. My gaze dropped to his mouth when I saw him turn up his lips into a smile. I'm Ro. Hi. I faced forward, noticing out of the corner of my eye that his hand was waiting for mine in greeting. A tiny gasp left his mouth as I squeezed and gave a single up-down motion. Oh, sorry, It's okay, Ro interrupted. The smile was back, and I was staring at his mouth again. I don't think I know your name. It's Arrow. Arrow Kenway. My face was hot. I hated saying my name to strangers. That's incredible, said Ro, a tone of awe in his words. My name is part of your name. What? I watched the light in his eyes and was mesmerized. Your name is Arrow. My name is Ro. Arrow. Arrow. You like my name? I could feel the disbelief wash over my face. Yeah, it's cool, said Ro with a bit of a shrug and another grin. I don't think anyone's ever liked my name before. I never had. What about your parents? They must have liked it to name you that. My dad named me. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. He had a tattoo of an arrow on his wrist, so when the doctor asked what my name was, he just looked down and said Arrow. It's still a great name. I'm pretty sure he was drunk at the time. Ro's grin faded as his eyes traced my face and stopped on my left cheek. The outline of Dirk's fingers were still there. Did you get hurt? Happens. My turn to shrug. To be honest, the physical pain was nothing compared to the pain of what Dirk had said about Donnie. Rose stared at me, clearly curious about my response. Blushing, I looked back down at my shoes and remembered again how ugly they were. My eyes darted over to Rose's shoes and saw well-worn high tops, originally black, but now a faded gray color. It made me smile and raise my eyes again. Why are you in here? I asked. Someone stole something from my locker. That sucks. Sorry. Yeah. Ro looked at his hands folded in his lap and swallowed hard. What was it? Picture of my mom? Ro refused to meet eyes. It was there this morning and now it's gone. A photograph? I wasn't sure what to say. No one would steal something that had no monetary value. Sorry. Ro rubbed his eyes. They were wet, and his voice cracked as he spoke. He sighed as he dropped his hands back down, revealing a heartbroken little boy. I just don't want it to be lost forever. Why do you think it's stolen? I asked gently. It wouldn't have fallen out on its own. Ro furrowed his brow. I searched my books and on the floor, but there's no sign of it. I'm sorry, I mumbled. Are you close to your mom? I almost wished I hadn't asked when he turned to me with the same look in his eyes that I had when anyone mentioned my own mother. I knew before he spoke that she was gone. She only took Polaroids. Rose sniffed and swallowed hard. So if I never find that picture, then that's the only copy, you know? He looked at me as he spoke, begging me to understand. Nodding, I felt my heart warm toward him. This was more than fascination now. This was a friendship. My hand slipped over his arm before I knew what it was doing. Rose smiled down at me and nodded, red painting the tops of his cheeks. A self-deprecating chuckle came from his mouth as he rubbed his hand on the back of his neck. Sorry, I probably look like a big sissy to you. Of course not. I shook my head. You love your mom. That's not a sissy thing. Thanks, Arrow. Ro watched me remove my hand and sighed. I'm not sure they'll do anything about it anyways. Seems as though there was a fight or something, and a stolen photograph isn't all that important. Sorry. I smiled apologetically at him. You were in the fight? I pointed at my cheek and grimaced. I heard there was blood and a broken nose. There was. Rose studied the floor, either too shy to ask for more details or realizing that he was sitting next to a girl that had bloodied a boy with her bare hands. Maybe this was the only moment of friendship for us. I looked down at my ripped and grease-stained shirt and rolled my eyes at myself. The fact that we even had this moment of friendship was a miracle. Kenway! A voice barked from the doorway. Get in here! I stood to my feet and walked steadily to meet my fate. Principal Gutter never expelled me because he knew I would never return, and he refused to let me quit on my education. Principal Gutter's wife had gone to school with my mother. Keeping me in school was their nod of respect toward her. I just kept telling myself that in less than a year school would be over forever, and I would never have to endure it again. I spotted Roe as I was leaving school for the day. He was climbing into the front seat of a minivan, the kind you would see on the west side of Cap. It made sense that his family would live in the suburbs, close to the school and the safe jobs. Before they could pull away, a short girl with bleached blonde hair ran up to the passenger side window and handed in a yellow sheet of paper. Rissa, I thought. As a resident Cap Public High do-gooder, everyone knew about her current project, recycling awareness. Rissa Thorne went through as many charity projects as she did hair colors. I didn't really have a problem with either Rissa's projects or her hair, except that none of them seemed like actual problems. Adopt a puppy? Great. What about the forever growing number of children in foster care and group homes that also needed to be adopted? Raise money for a new park? Sure. But what about the hundreds of homeless people who needed actual houses? They were all the same. Save the sea turtles, save the environment, save the trees. But what about saving the people? They deserve each other, actually, Rissa and Ro. He probably already loves recycling. The next morning was muggy and gray, the humidity curling the wisps of hair around my temples and making my clothes stick to my sweaty skin. Down the hall, Ro pulled a few books from his locker and tucked them under his arm. I slowed my pace to avoid walking beside him so I could continue observing. People ignored him, just as they ignored me. Him because he was new, and me because I was a Southie. Standing straight, his impeccable posture made him appear taller than he already was. He was thin and possibly strong, although I couldn't tell yet. His hair was cut short, dark brown, and irresistibly smooth-looking. There was a softness to his features, and I found it hard to look away. How could a boy look so, well, pretty? He's only 15, said a girl who was the authority on most Cap Public High gossip as she stood in the bathroom, a cigarette between her fingers. We had never had a conversation, but sometimes I would listen to her outrageous rumors and theories from the shadows. What? No, I thought he was a senior, her best friend gasped. Yeah, and this is his last year of school. My brother's friend asked him, and he said yes. I don't believe that. Remember when Jerry said his siblings were from Russia? Never listen to Jerry. Jerry's always making stuff up. He's actually 15? Yeah, and a senior. How did he do that? He's probably a boy genius, she giggled. I heard he was homeschooled. A girl who hadn't spoken yet put in. Homeschooled? Yeah, I heard that too, said another girl. And my mom was at the grocery store when his mom was, and they had a 15-minute conversation. Wow, that's crazy. One of the girls noticed me washing my hands slowly as I listened to their conversation. Scowling at me with a disgusted sigh, she made it obvious that I wasn't welcome. Quickly, I dried my hands and left, my head down to avoid the judgmental stares that surrounded me. It didn't strike me as fair that this 15-year-old boy was flying through high school while I, on the other hand, was 17 and had barely scraped by without redoing every grade. High school for me had been simultaneously harder and easier. On one hand, people cared less, and I was able to slip through the halls unnoticed. But at the same time, I rarely understood what my teachers were teaching from the front of the room. I happened to sit next to Roe in English and took the 20 minutes the teacher gave us to start on our assignment to stare. His wide brow furrowed as he scribbled across the empty pages of his notebook with his left hand. He squinted as line after line of his neat handwriting appeared on the paper. He caught my stare out of the corner of his eye, and red filled my cheeks. I quickly faced my paper, my pencil still poised above the page without having written a single word in the space of 5 minutes. I dared to glance in his direction a few seconds later and saw him grinning as he turned back to his work that I would never do. My teachers had the same low expectations for me as they did every other Southie who somehow miraculously found themselves lucky enough to make it to high school. But I didn't mind. I was much better at other things, and honestly, how was writing about what dead people had to say hundreds of years ago going to help me with life? It wasn't. My mother used to read all the time, and it hadn't helped her. Roe raised his hand to signal to the teacher that he was finished. Out of the 30 12th graders in our class, only 7 of them had done the work, most because they were lazy, although some because they were in the same boat as me. They didn't understand what they were supposed to do. "Well done, Roe," said our teacher with a smile. "Guys, Roe has just done excellent work. Very happy to see the effort he put into his paper." Someone scoffed out the name, "Teacher's pet," and a ripple of laughter ran through the room. The bell rang, and I stood up to leave. "Arrow!" I heard him, but I ignored it. There was no reason to speak to anyone. One more hour, and then home. One more hour of judgmental looks, derogatory comments, and keeping on high alert in case someone decided they wanted to get physical. Most boys didn't try to fight me more than once, but there had been exceptions, and I could never be too careful. Home was a 40-minute walk through the back alleys and past vacant buildings to the poorest, most run-down neighborhood of Cap, Virginia. Besides staying safe at school, I learned at a young age to defend myself against the bums lurking in alleyways, the kids loitering on street corners, and, of course, the watchful policemen making their rounds. The vigilance was not for our safety, but their own amusement, or for some, their own twisted sense of justice. Any policeman that did rounds on the south side of Cap was paid by Sullivan Gray and acted off the books. Even more important than learning self-defense was the art of keeping out of sight when certain officers were on duty. The route I took to and from school wasn't the fastest way by any means, but it was the safest. After 20 minutes, I left the main road and cut behind an old bank that hid me from the view of the only nice coffee shop close to South Cap. Next, I passed through 3 alleyways, the closed-down strip mall, and between a gas station and warehouse. Doing so kept me away from the most heavily populated areas and the corners where the policemen often stopped Southies. I looked around carefully as I came to where I needed to cross the road. Voices from down the street caught my attention, and I slunk back against the rear exit of the gas station. "Where are you going, Southie?" Officer Clarence was known for his maltreatment of Southies. The man he was glaring at was standing respectfully, with his head bowed and his hands at his side, clearly not wanting to cause trouble. "You seem nervous. What's the matter? On your way to do something you shouldn't be?" I swallowed hard. If Officer Clarence had anything on him, it would be very bad for him. After a few moments of intimidating antics, the officer let the man continue on his way. I waited until Officer Clarence was back in his car before I dashed across the road and into my neighborhood. Nobody patrolled our streets. We were the wild ones who had to take care of ourselves. Even though my family made just as much money as our neighbors, we were the bottom of the barrel for Cap. I was reminded of it every day as I walked past houses where mothers would scream at me for being a dirty orphan, and young men spat at my feet. Never mind the fact that none of them went to school past 8th grade, and all of my siblings attended the public high school on the west side of Cap, so we could have a chance at a decent future. It didn't matter that my brother Donnie was one of the only males in South Cap to ever take college courses, and that our mother was the most educated and beautiful woman to ever live in Cap. They looked down their noses at us, needing to be bigger and better than somebody in this messed up city. "Wasted," they used to say when they saw us all trailing after our mother, dressed in our finest for church on Sunday. "Could have been the most powerful lady here, but here she is taking care of orphan brats." I approached my home, a white 2-story house with chipped paint, broken windows, and a sagging front porch. The light was on in the kitchen and the upstairs bedroom the 2 of my brothers shared. Perhaps Donnie was up and around today. Hopeful, I skipped the front steps and rushed into the house. "Donnie?" I called. There was no answer, so I hurried down the hallway to the left, where the kitchen was. Donnie was there, a bag of expired, frozen mixed vegetables pressed against his bruised and purple face. On the table in front of him was a pile of bloody towels. Donnie! I felt my head go light for a second before I steadied myself. It wasn't the blood, or even the amount of blood that I could see soaked into the fabric, but the knowledge that it had come from my brother's face that got me. What happened? I'm fine. You're a terrible liar, I said hoarsely, as fear for my brother's well-being choked my words. My tears were for more than just that moment and the blood on the table, but for waking up at 1 a.m. 2 nights earlier to our brother Finn dragging Donnie up the stairs, shouting at us to get out of bed and grab the first aid kit. It wasn't the first time that had happened, and my stomach twisted at the thought of it not being the last. You got into a fight, didn't you? I ran into McFarland, said Donnie. Was talking bad about Mom. Donnie was the hero of the family. He would protect us from anything in a heartbeat. Sometimes it was terrifying the way he would risk himself for us. He had always been like that, though, even before he and Finn were our legal guardians. They were approaching their 24th birthdays in the next few months, but they had been looking after us for 5 years now. They weren't the oldest siblings, just the oldest at home. It was hard to remember a time when it wasn't the two of them at the helm of our household. Technically, Finn was older, as his birthday was first, but Donnie had always been the leader between the two of them. The chair scraped against the linoleum as Donnie stood stiffly to his feet. He shuffled across the floor until he could put an arm around my shoulders. Normally, I would push away from such an act, but not with Donnie. Not after having to clean up a trail of his blood from the creaky wooden staircase while listening to him groan through gritted teeth as Finn stitched up his forehead. I knew he could see the tears swimming in my eyes. "You've got to stop," I whispered. "You know they'll kill you if they get a chance." "Still here, kid," he said slowly, "and I don't plan on leaving anytime soon." I nodded and swallowed hard. "Okay, still here." "Do you..." I paused to clear the lump out of my throat. "Do you need more ibuprofen?" "Just took some." He straightened and gave my shoulder a squeeze with his calloused hand. "Saving the last for Cody." I nodded, my stomach nodding at the thought. Cody was a reckless fighter and usually sustained more damage than he delivered when he fought. "I'm going upstairs to do homework." I wasn't actually going to do homework, but I needed to be someplace where I wasn't staring at my brother's damaged face or the empty pantry shelves. Rory wouldn't be home from her job as a nanny in Westcap until Thursday, and she was the one who usually bought groceries. Maybe Finn would have a little extra money to tide us over until then. Deciding to sleep until someone woke me up, I lay down on the thin, lumpy mattress that I shared with Ivy. We had been bedmates since we were old enough to walk, best friends, and babies of the family. None of us were biologically related, but our mother raised us believing that water was thicker than blood. It was Mother who taught us how to keep our heads up when people threw rocks and words. No one fought for us to be a family more than she did. She raised 15 children with motherly love, dedication, and devotion, yet not one of us came from her womb. For us younger ones, it was easy. Our older siblings had paved the way and set an example of how we were to love and treat one another. I tugged my phone out of my pocket and unlocked it with a swipe of my fingers over the dots. I tapped on the photo album symbol and pulled up the only picture of my entire family. Carefully, I studied each face, again, for the millionth time. And that was what happened when people in your family died. You could never take a new picture with them. My oldest siblings were strangers to me now. Life with them was a blur of half-remembered memories intermingled with funerals and my first day of school. Still, I knew I had loved them once, and they had loved me. It made me sad that I didn't have them anymore. I traced my finger over my mother's face and tried to remember what it felt like to sit on her lap like I was doing in that photograph, 3 years old and still sucking my thumb. She was so beautiful and dignified. No one could break her down, but everyone tried, it seemed like. All I wanted was to be as strong as her one day. With a sigh, I turned off my phone screen and closed my eyes. No one woke me up for supper, probably because there had been nothing to eat. I stirred at some point in the night and discovered I was covered with a blanket and Ivy was pressed against my back. Even in the summer heat, Ivy couldn't keep herself from being close as she slept. Because we looked nothing alike, her African American heritage creating a contrast between our dark and light colored skin, it was easy to hide the fact that we were sisters. I put my hand over hers and went back to sleep. My alarm woke me up at 6 a.m. Knowing that the hot water in our rusty old pipes would only last so long, I slid noiselessly from the bed and across the creaking floor. I snatched up an armful of clothes from the top of the dresser and crossed the hall for the shower. When I came back to the room, Ivy was awake, fully dressed, and sitting on the end of the bed with her algebra textbook. I hated algebra. "Did you sleep well in your clothes last night?" she asked, glancing up at me. "Yeah." I shrugged, pulling my fingers through my wet and tangled dark-colored hair. It was already reaching past my shoulder blades, longer than I normally kept it. "Want some?" asked Ivy, tube of her favorite dark red lipstick in her hand, and a playful glint in her eyes. "No, thanks." I rolled my eyes at her and she chuckled, as though she didn't ask the same question every other week. Where Ivy embraced the female habit of wearing what would enhance her great natural beauty, I had no desire for it. Her millions of black curls bounced as she returned her focus to her school. The blue of her eyeshadow matched the blue of her tight t-shirt that was tucked into her short black skirt that she wore regularly. Despite her girly getup, her footwear was sensible, simple white sneakers with fresh shoelaces that were a shade brighter than her shoes. "Did anything exciting happen last night?" I asked. "Not much," said Ivy with a small toss of her curls. "What did you all do?" "Nothing, just the normal." "So you were with Caden?" I said, knowing that the name would cause Ivy to blush. "Caden was busy last night," said Ivy with a coy smile as she snapped her book shut and stood to her feet. "See you at school, sis." "Later." I watched her walk out of the room and listened to her footsteps on the stairs. My brain went through the schedule and remembered that Finn worked third shift at the airport on Wednesday mornings, so the only person in the kitchen would be Donnie. I couldn't hear them, but I knew that Donnie would tell Ivy to have a good day and come home safe as she grabbed an apple or stale bagel for lunch. In 2 minutes, I would go down, he would say the same thing to me, and I would consider giving him a hug, because I love him and want him to know. I would probably just settle for an extra smile as I said goodbye, though. I snatched at my backpack and headed down the stairs. "See ya, kid. Be good. Come home safe." Donnie was sipping his coffee by the counter, his face looking less swollen than it had the day before. I hesitated in the doorway, my apple in my hand. "You okay?" "Yeah." I gave him an extra smile and turned to leave. "Bye, kid." I walked out the door and exhaled slowly. Donnie knows I love him, I reassured myself. He knows that whether I hug him or not. I didn't feel much better. During PE, I let my muscles do the thinking and pushed all thoughts of my family from my head. We were told to run a mile, and I was at the front of the class as we began making laps. Naturally a good runner, I stayed in the lead. I was still on my first lap when I noticed Roe. Surprisingly, he was catching up with me. I slowed the tiniest bit, glancing over my shoulder on the bend to see his legs stretching long and his arms moving to the rhythm of his pace. I listened to his feet pounding behind me for the rest of my 4 laps. Once we were finished, I stood to the side, my water bottle in my hand and sweaty towel over my shoulder. Roe stood several feet away, taking sips of water and cooling down. My eyes moved down his body, and I saw the definition of muscle in his thighs and calves. His shoulders and back rippled as he lifted his arms above his head to stretch at the command of Mr. Green. "Kenway, get moving! Come on!" Mr. Green barked in my direction. Mr. Green was the only teacher I had that had never failed me at one point or another. But that didn't mean he liked me. He tolerated me because I played the best and could take the hardest hits, even more so than the boys, but there had never been a connection between us. I was, after all, a Southie. His favorite student was a tall, rich boy with broad shoulders from the center of the city, right on the cusp of sophisticated East Cap. I never trusted people whose favorite student was one of the spoiled brats. I hid in the corner of the library with my apple during lunchtime that day. The library was my secret spot of solitude and silence. It wasn't a popular location for most of my classmates, which made it the perfect place to hide away. Sometimes I would pull a book down and glance at a few pages. I never read them, but I just wanted to feel the smooth paper under my fingertips. More often than not, though, I would just sit and breathe. There was no shouting. There's no smack of skin against skin. There's no cold concrete and metallic taste in my mouth. No blood, no pain, just pages and words. Two things my mother loved. The following week I spotted Ro there, his head bowed over a book, and his feet tapping against the dirty slate-colored carpet of the library. I stood behind him, staring through the shelves, peering through the gap between the tops of books and the shelf above. Maybe he could sense my gray eyes through the slats, or maybe he was glancing at the clock on the wall behind him. Either way, I watched him turn in his chair, and his eyes landed on mine. Caught again. "Arrow!" he called me. I didn't respond, or stay to listen, just grabbed my backpack and left. That was the last time I went to the library at lunchtime for a while. "Hey, Arrow!" A voice stopped me as I was leaving school on Thursday. "Wait up!" I was surprised to see Ro chasing me down the sidewalk, his backpack hooked over both shoulders, and a grin shining as brightly as the hot, early fall sunshine filtering through the trees and clouds. Part of me wanted to bolt, like I had every other time, but something stopped me. I waited, my heart thumping just the tiniest bit louder than normal. Sweat moistened my palms, and I wiped it away discreetly. "Hi!" He grinned at me as I stared up at him. "Where are you going?" "I'm home?" I pulled my eyebrows down as I jerked my thumb over my shoulder. "Where did you think I was going?" "I don't know," said Ro easily as he lifted his shoulders and scuffed one foot over the sidewalk. "Can I join you?" "Join me?" "Yeah, I just wanted to be friends. Hang out." "Don't you have other people to be friends with?" I gestured toward the hundreds of teenagers milling about the school lawn and jumping into cars. I searched for Rissa, but I didn't know what color her hair was at the moment. "Oh!" Ro's face showed his surprise with the hurt on the edges. "I'm sorry. I assumed from the office that—" "That's not what I meant." I stopped him. "I just don't have many friends that, aren't, like, from my part of town." "Why not?" He looked so innocently curious, I didn't want to tell him. "That's just how it is in Cap. Everyone has their place. I'm from the South Side. You're not." "Does that mean I'm not allowed to be your friend? Like Romeo and Juliet?" "Like who?" "Romeo and Juliet." I stared at him blankly. "You don't know who Romeo and Juliet are?" He was laughing, but nicely. "Well, they were characters in a story." I hate stories. I pulled a face and turned to take a few steps down the sidewalk. Ro matched my movements, and I decided not to say anything about him joining me. Not yet. "But I saw you in the library," he said. "Because it's quiet there." "Why do you hate stories?" "They don't change anything in my life. Why should I waste my time on them?" "Everything's a story," said Rose simply. "You're a story, I'm a story, history, science, dance can all be stories in their own way." "What about fighting?" I asked pointedly. "Well, yeah, of course. There's the fight, people who fight, and then there's the resolution when the fighting ends. What if it never ends?" "What?" Ro glanced at me. "What about death?" "Well, yeah, there are stories where people die." Rose seemed uncomfortable with the tone of my questions, but they didn't scare him away. "Name one." "Well, Romeo and Juliet, actually. Their story has fighting in it, too." "How ironic." "What happened?" I didn't know what ironic meant, so I ignored it. "They were part of two different, neighborhoods, basically. Their families were, anyway. They fell in love at a mask, a dance where you can't see anyone's face, and didn't know they were from rival families until they were already hopelessly in love. They weren't allowed to be together because their families hated each other, but they were too in love to live without each other." Pfft, Romeo and Juliana sound pathetic. "Romeo and Juliet," said Ro with a smile tugging on his mouth, until he let it win and laughed. "What happened after that?" I asked. "You'll have to read the story one day and find out." His hands reached down into his pockets as he walked beside me, his shadow laying over my frame like a blanket. "I'm never going to read it. I never read anything." "Then you'll never know how it ends." Ro appeared to be unsympathetic to my plight and continued to walk unhurriedly down the sidewalk with me. "Savage," I said with a shake of my head. "What do you do for fun?" Ro asked, ignoring my comment. "Fun?" The question caught me off guard. Fun wasn't really a thing in our house. Not read. What do you do? Well, I'm a dancer, so I do dance classes and dance? I stared at my companion with blatant surprise. Like, why? Could hardly avoid it even if I wanted to. A chuckle accompanied his words. Both of my parents were dancers. I mostly did it because I wanted to try to reconcile my mom's family with my dad and I, but it didn't work. So now I'm stuck being a dancer until I'm fat and old. Why don't you just quit? Why would I quit? Ro gazed down at me, anticipating my answer. Well, you made it sound like you didn't want to dance. I don't really, but it's important that I stick with it. I shrugged and looked away. It was his own life. Hey, do you know anything about the underground fights that used to happen back in the 1960s? The question made me stop dead in my tracks, as if a wall had appeared in front of me. I blinked and felt my face go hot. It wasn't from embarrassment or anger, but simply a deep passion that had been whispered into my ears since the day I was born. Arrow? Yeah, I know about them, I said, forcing my heart to calm down. Oh, great! Rose smiled brightly. I'm going to do my history report on them. It has to be a local subject, and I wondered if you could help me. I can't find a lot about it when I search online, but I figured you could. I have to go. I didn't let him find words to stop me before I ran down an alley and cut across the busy part of West Cap. I didn't slow my pace until I was in front of the strip mall and shielded from the road. Rose's questions circled incessantly around my head. It was just like a newcomer to poke their nose into things they had no right looking into. Not that the information was a secret, but his family would never have to deal with the consequences of them. Ask anybody in Cap, and they would say yes, they knew about the underground fights. Previously held as a myth, the stories of extreme abuse and extortion done by Stuart Gray, famously known as Old Gray, were confirmed as true. The Gray family had always been the richest family in the city, carrying the most influence and weight with their words because of the amount of money behind them. Because of that, the Grays were allowed to make most of the city's decisions, and those who didn't agree were silenced or ignored by the general public. Men of integrity soon moved on to other cities instead of settling down and raising their families where corruption was sure to occur sooner or later. From the very beginning, the south side of Cap, Virginia was known as the poor side of town, but nothing terrible. When the Grays needed more workers for the factories and hard labor positions, they would recruit from the South Cap High School. People from the South Side didn't have things handed to them. They worked for what they wanted. When they were promised paychecks and benefits from Old Gray himself, they signed up in droves. Until then, the Grays hadn't been terrible. Selfish and narrow-minded, yes, but nothing to indicate the depths of twisted darkness in the deep places of Old Gray's heart. No one other than Old Gray himself fully knew why he hated the people on the south side of Cap, but one day he looked out at his hundreds of vulnerable workers and created a plan to exploit them. That's when the fights began. They were started by stroking young, eager egos, pitting man against man, and making a big deal over the winners. They would be held after work, a handful of men chosen by Old Gray and sworn into secrecy. Of course, word began spreading, as Old Gray had wanted, and he soon had a group of strong, stupid boys willing to do whatever he asked. For Old Gray and his closest buddies, it was a sport, a pastime where they would gather together, drink whiskey, and smoke fancy cigars. That's when the betting started, and money began to play the most important role. At first, the fighters didn't care that they weren't being paid. They were just flattered to be part of something that Old Gray told them was exclusive. But that feeling quickly faded, and several of the wiser young men decided they were finished. When the men realized it wasn't worth the physical pain and divisiveness it was causing among them, Old Gray created problems. Docked pay, demotions, extra hours, broken machinery, and unreasonable shift managers. All of them were too uneducated and angry to handle the situation well, and they found themselves trapped. In a city that catered to the man's every whim, who would go against Old Gray in court, especially based on the word of some Southie factory worker? Besides, Old Gray had a posse of South Cap boys who would refute every negative thing said about their master. Old Gray's favorites were groomed to be his spokespeople, rallying their peers around Old Gray's ideas and drawing them into his net. The Southies called them traitors and sellouts, but they didn't care. They were given raises for doing less work and invited up into the air-conditioned office for lunches catered by the Crazy Goon, the most expensive restaurant in Cap. Those who were not the chosen ones were left to pick up the slack and still come fight whenever asked. The fights became a form of punishment. Miss a shift? You have to fight. Failed to meet the weekly production goal? Fight. Look at old Gray wrong? Fight. Those who refused were fired and ruined financially. Houses accidentally caught on fire. Children were harassed and bullied, and wives no longer felt safe leaving their homes. Elderly parents were evicted and denied care unless their sons did as they were asked. Unexplained deaths increased as the coroner bought himself a new car and his wife remodeled her kitchen. The snitches provided intimate information that allowed Old Gray to find the easiest way to get what he wanted. By the end of 6 months, the crowd watching the fights was almost 100 strong. Old Gray was making more money off admittance fees and lost bets than he was spending on beers and electricity to keep the floodlights on a few extra hours every Friday. Money the fighters never saw. I was still breathing heavily as I approached home. I could look around my neighborhood and point out 100 things that were because of Old Gray. After a decade of stripping Southies of their dignity, their pride, and their sons, Old Gray shut the fights down. It was purely a business move. A competing company moved into town, and he knew it was time to put the skeletons in the closet. For us, it was too late. The reputation of South Cap being a dirty hellhole full of brutes and idiots was firmly planted in everyone's minds, even ours. Most people didn't think about the old 1960s fights. It was a week of shocking headlines, and then, oh look, the mayor is getting divorced again. But we never forgot. We deteriorated from men who used to be friends to men who are now enemies. Blood from the fights dripped through their memories, dividing families and loved ones. While the rest of Cap moved on, South Cap did not. No one had money. No one had happiness. No one had dreams. It was the 5th Tuesday of the school year when Mrs. Ross pulled me aside after class, concerned for me spilling from her eyes. I struggled to excuse myself, knowing that Dirk would be watching to report me to Stephen. She kept a firm hand on my arm, though, and offered once more to help me study or to come over for a meal with her and her family. Maddox and I would be honored to have you as a guest in our home, she said. Claire Ross had a soft spot for the underdog, but her kindness was going to cause problems in my life. Of course, it was a well-meaning gesture, but I knew it was because I was a Southie and an orphan. I wondered if she could see the panic on my face as I nodded and said, "Yes, ma'am, and thank you, but I'm fine, Mrs. Ross." As soon as I left the room, Dirk was on me. "You're gonna fight now, Southie." His hot breath hit my ear and the side of my neck, the weight of his words running down my spine. "I warned you." I said nothing as I shook him off and carried on down the hallway. The sick feeling that I knew so well formed in my gut as I curled my hands into fists. Those fights that started in the 1960s? Yeah, they still happened. There were a few differences between the fights started by Old Gray and the current fights, the main one being that the South Cap rings, referred to mostly as the underground, was also a place for people to make a few extra bucks. It was a very fickle system of payment and people fought dirty, but as the saying went in South Cap, fighters couldn't be choosers, even the ones who didn't choose to fight. If you worked at one of the Gray family factories, they still used fights as punishment, or if a foreman didn't like you and wanted to make sure you knew it. Certain police officers would sometimes offer it to you as an alternative to getting out of tickets, fines, or jail time. Cody was pacing in the hallway when I arrived home that day, his shaggy blonde hair stuck up from having run his hands through it too many times. On the stairway to the upstairs was Cole, patiently listening to Cody's angry tirade. Cody glared at me as I walked in, not because he was upset at me, but because he hated life and wanted to make sure everyone around him knew it. Staring him down, I silently challenged him to give me his best sob story. "You don't want to know about my day," he snapped. "I hate this stupid place and everyone in it." My eyes flitted to 18-year-old Cole, who was sitting quietly. Donnie always told him he was too indulgent of Cody's raging emotions, but I figured if Cole didn't mind, then what did it matter? I turned my eyes back to Cody. When I appeared unmoved by his complaints, he rolled his eyes and exhaled loudly. He rubbed his hands over his face and faked a smile. Hey kid, how was school? It was great. I faked a smile of my own and swallowed hard. This was my least favorite time of day. Coming home to tell my brothers I had to go to the underground. I hesitated just long enough that I didn't even have to say the words. Oh, for the love! Cody cut himself off and punched the wall. He cursed loudly and dragged his fingers through his hair. Why? What happened this time? My teacher talked to me after class. Mrs. Ross? Asked Cole. He had had her last year when he was a senior. Yeah, Dirk saw. I hung my head and stared down at my dirty shoes. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and I knew it was a text telling me I had a fight that night. Well, if it makes you feel any better, I have to go to the underground too. Cody sighed. Half the guys in my unit at the factory took jobs to fight at Sullivan's. And you didn't, I guessed. Wants all the best fighters for himself, said Cody, with an irritated twitch of his shoulders. And when he can't have them, he screws with them. How many rounds will they make you do? I don't know. Cody shrugged. You okay, Arrow? Cole's blue eyes always seemed so clear and honest, especially compared to Cody's brown ones that couldn't settle in any one place for longer than a few seconds. I'm fine. My stomach rumbled as I stepped past Cole and walked up the stairs to my bedroom, reminding me that all I ate for lunch was an apple. I wished there was food in the kitchen. My bedroom was hot and empty. I felt tears crowding up against my eyes now that I was alone for the first time since Dirk accosted me at school. Leaning over my bed, I placed my hands against the mattress and took several long, shaky breaths. I hadn't been to the underground since before school started over a month ago, and it felt big and terrible in a way I couldn't describe. Downstairs, the front door opened, and Donnie's voice filtered through the floorboards. Quickly, I straightened and pulled myself together. A knock on my bedroom door sounded a minute later, and I knew Donnie already knew. Furiously, I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and called for him to come in. He opened the door. The stitches in his forehead healed enough to be okay with a simple bandage. I'm fine, I said before Donnie could even open his mouth. I know, he said. You want me to come with? No, they'll make you fight. Not while my head is still bandaged. Donnie tapped his finger against his forehead. I'll be fine. Cody will be there. Donnie gave me a look that said we both knew how much help Cody was going to be. 19 and headstrong, Cody was always bursting with some type of emotion. Even though 5 years younger, he was nearly as tall and broad as his older brothers. I knew there were times that Donnie wished the boy were smaller, so he could hold him in his place when he was being foolish. At least he's not going because he talked back to the supervisors this time, said Donnie with a tired sigh. Then he reached over and put a hand on my arm. Get changed and come down to eat. You need food before you go. I ate, but barely, feeling too nervous to finish most of the pasta and meatballs that Donnie dished up on my plate. I could tell that Donnie was worried about me, as meatballs were a rare treat for us. When I glanced over at him at the end of the table, he nodded at me, urging me to eat some more. Across from me, Cody ate 2 platefuls, continuing to spew angrily about life. Why do you think they're targeting us again? Asked Cole nervously when Cody was quiet for a moment. First, making you fight for your paycheck, Cody for not taking a job at Sullivan's, Arrow for talking to the teacher. They didn't bother us this much over the summer. I don't know. Donnie set down his fork and rubbed his hands through his hair. All I know is that Gray is a dark and twisted man who hates our family very much. It could be a coincidence. Cole poked his fork at his food. It's too much to just be a coincidence, said Cody, standing up from his spot. Gray's got too much power to pull sloppy moves. There's a reason. Mom always said he planned 10 steps ahead. Donnie said nothing, but leaned back in his chair. Completely void of appetite, I leaned back too. I swallowed hard and took a deep breath. Being born on the south side of Cap meant the cards of life were stacked against you before your life even started. An Arrow is the Sun by Bailey A. Osborne. Chapter 2. Well, we were born to die. My boots were laced up tightly, and my hair pulled back into a knot on the back of my head. Usually Ivy would braid my hair before fights to keep it out of my face and the hands of my opponents, but she was at work until 10. I almost sent her a text to tell her I had a fight, but I didn't want her to fret about me. The boys would tell her when she came home. Running my hands over my hair, I gave myself one last look in the dirty bathroom mirror. This will have to do for now, I thought. Arrow, come on! Cody shouted from downstairs. Finn was waiting with Cody by the front door when I joined him. He nodded at my appearance and gave me a smile. You'll do great, kid, he said, giving me a quick pat on the shoulder. My good one. As I stepped out into the growing darkness of evening, I heard Finn tell Cody to keep an eye on me, and Cody grunt in reply. My brother's worried about all of us when we went to fight, but Ivy and me especially. There weren't many other fighters in the rings that were our age, or even gender. I was often matched against men who were much older and stronger than I was because there was no one else. Oh, and because they hated me. They hated all of Margaret Caroline's children. That was why my brothers had trained me incessantly to become the best fighter I could be. I knew being a fighter was in my blood, too. My father used to be called Crusher in the rings. We reached our destination faster than I wanted, Cody setting a relentless pace with his long legs. My hands shook as we walked up to the side entrance used by the fighters. Dark, shadowed, and putrid smelling, the entryway always made me think about walking into hell. I guess it made sense, since I felt a piece of me die every time I walked through the door. Look who it is, Crippler and Arrow. The man at the door knew us, calling Cody by his fighting name. We held out our phones, the screen showing our information for the night. He scanned them with his device and nodded. Cody walked in, but the man grabbed me by the sleeve. Steven's waiting, he said. The way he smirked made my stomach twist. I hated Stephen Gray. Ever since my mother had died, there was some sort of agreement between Stephen and his father that Stephen was allowed to use me as his plaything in the rings. For whatever reason, he was given the task of making my life miserable. I couldn't tell if the hatred I felt for him was mutual, but he reveled in my pain. I thought about Roe and wondered what he would think if he saw me at that moment, wrapping up my hands, stripping down to an undershirt and sports bra. Beside me, Cody pulled off his t-shirt and wrapped his hands. He glanced over as he waited for me to finish. Usually I had Ivy or one of my brothers help me wrap my hands, but Cody didn't offer. Don't let Stephen get in your head, said Cody, nodding in the direction of the young man who was surrounded by a crowd of people on the other side of the room. Stephen was the only member of the Gray family who came to the underground more than once a year. Normally he only came when I fought, to gain full satisfaction from witnessing the suffering I had to endure. But sometimes he and his entourage of a dozen or so equally terrible young men came just for fun. Stephen was around Cody's age, yet completely opposite from him in physical features. Where Cody was covered with muscles and scars, Stephen had smooth skin and haughty glances. His face was pale, as were his eyes. His hair was dark, his hands bony, and his voice rich. Do it for Mom. Cody grabbed my shoulder and made me look at him. Okay? Do it for Mom. How often had I heard those words since her death 5 years ago, when I was only 12? For Cody, it was the only way he made it through. Even though he had come to my mother as an angry toddler who responded to no amount of gentling, she was the only person Cody had ever respected. Finn and Donnie tried their hardest with him now that Mother was gone, but each day it was harder to see who he used to be behind the growing wall of bitterness. We all missed Mom, but Cody lost himself the day we found her body. Yeah, I nodded, for Mom. Smile, kid, we got this. Cody held out his fist and grinned at me as I gave him a half-hearted smile. I bumped my knuckles against his and tucked that moment into my memory. I wanted to remember Cody like this. We turned to leave the changing area, and Cody glanced over his shoulder to make sure I was close as we headed toward the rings. The underground was aptly named for being an enormous, concrete underground room. It was so dark down there that you couldn't even see halfway to the other side with the lights on. When it was empty, though, you could hear your own footsteps echo off the walls forever. Rubble, garbage, and human excrement piled up sporadically along the walls. A steady flow of sewage ran through one corner, steeping the entire place in a stink that could only be missed if you were right in the middle of the crowd watching the fighters. Giant floodlights shone down on 3 rings that stood in the middle of the first half of the area. No one went back any farther than that. There was no need to when there was enough space in the front of the room. Being in the crowd around the rings was thrilling. You could hear the groans and see the way fist against skin marked the bodies red and raw. Blood might splatter on your face and stain you the way it stained the fighters. All your senses were assailed by the stench of sweat, blood, and vomit. You had to keep your feet under you because if you lost your balance and fell to the floor, you would be trampled. Spectators were money-hungry, bloodlusting men who wanted to have more than they did, their greedy fingers itching to touch and own and be the king of it all. Inside the ring was a different feel completely. It was in the ring when I could feel the very blood in my veins reaching down to my fingertips and my rib cage stretch around my lungs as I took in deep breaths. The spotlight would shine down on the face of my opponent and blaze on the back of my neck. Sweat would be pricking at my skin before I even landed a single blow. The crowd was pale and faded from my senses as everything inside of me focused on what was happening in the ring. My very survival depended on it. Cody and I were herded into what was called the pit, the place the fighters stood and waited to be called into a ring. It was a small area behind the rings where the audience could see us but couldn't touch us. Without a word, Cody left my side and went to stand with a few guys he knew. I crossed my arms and hugged the perimeter, hoping to stay out of sight. Skimming my eyes over the crowd, I saw a lot of the regulars. Most of the men betting on the fights were from South Cap. They would watch me walk to and from school every day, jeering me for being a girl, for being poor, for not having parents, and call my name with adulation when I won a round in the rings. "Hey, kid," a voice came from behind me. "Hi, Caden." I looked up to see the face of my sister's boyfriend. I mean, I assumed they were dating. They held hands in the living room anyway, and she turned red whenever we said his name. "What did you do this time?" "I'm here for the money," said Caden, stooping a little to make sure I heard his words. "What?" I glanced at him in disbelief. "I thought you were smarter than to try to get money from this crooked system." "Well," Caden shrugged, "I need the extra money." "But you know you might not even see a cent of it." "I have to try." Caden rubbed his big hands over his closely shaven hair. His dark skin was only a couple shades darker than Ivy's. His brown eyes and strong jaw gave him a handsome face. "What do you need the money for?" I didn't feel embarrassed asking such a personal question. Caden was like a member of the family since he had grown up on the other side of the fence from our backyard my whole life. "Just," Caden coughed and rubbed his hands together a bit awkwardly. "I want to take Ivy out on dates, you know." He didn't look back down at me again until his name was called. He went to one of the side rings where, if he won, he would receive money for the fight. You didn't fight for extra money unless you had no other choice. Every Southie in his right mind knew that. There were just too many unpredictable variables tied up in it to make it a reliable source of income. The fact that Caden was willing to risk it in order to have more money to take care of my sister made me smile. No boy would ever fight for me, I knew that, but knowing that someone was willing to do it for my sister was enough. Time ticked by, the volume and temperature of the room growing steadily. I heard Cody's name called twice before mine was. I was paired against a boy who looked to be around Cody's age. He was nervous, though, and I wondered why he was in the rings. Eyeing me suspiciously, I could imagine him asking the same thing about me. "This is what happens when your mom refuses to marry Sullivan Gray," I said to myself as I rolled my shoulders and stretched my arms, waiting for the sound of the starting bell. There were fights going to my right and my left, but I was focused only on the other person in the ring. It was clear that the boy had no idea how to fight, so I quickly came at him and took him to the ground. He was strong, he had that going for him, but he was uncoordinated and untrained. Shocked, he gaped up at me as I held him down against the mat. He didn't even struggle as the ringmaster declared the fight over, and I was the winner. "You're an amazing fighter," said the boy as he followed me out of the ring. "Thank you," I said coldly as I grabbed the edge of my shirt and used it to wipe the sweat from my forehead. "What is the girl doing at the underground?" he asked, staying on my heels. "I've never seen a girl here before." "Mind your own business." I narrowed my eyes at him and searched the pit for my brother or Caden. "Are you here for, fun?" "Yeah, 'cause getting my face smashed is a barrel of laughs." "No, fun." The boy seemed to have a hidden meaning to his words. He came closer, the look in his blown-out pupils too hard to misinterpret. My hands balled into fists, and I was a second away from flattening the guy for a second time when someone grabbed him by the back of his shirt and yanked him away. "Hey!" Cody got into the young man's face. "Stay away from my sister!" Air came flooding back into my lungs as my brother protected me. There was still blood dripping down Cody's chin from his last fight as he threatened to kill the boy on the spot if he caught him coming at me again. Mumbling that he would stay away, the boy left and went to the other side of the pit. Cody stood beside me. Crossing his arms, he spat out a mouthful of blood onto the stained concrete floor. One of his eyes was swelling shut. I wondered how many more times he would be put in. "Steven is leaving!" Cody shouted down at me. "I guess you're done!" I sighed, relieved. No one else paid me any mind as I stood quietly while Cody was called up to fight his third round for the evening. It was against a man known as Snake. Snake was thin and red-headed with a temper to match. Unmarried and without children, I couldn't imagine that he was there to make extra money, and I had never seen the police bother him, but he was there regularly. Finn mentioned once that maybe he just wanted to fight. He was good at it, too. Nervous for Cody, I watched intently from where I was standing. After a long round of punches and tackles, Cody took the victory. I cheered proudly. "You're crazy, crippler!" A man I didn't know slapped my brother on the back as he left the ring. "If you win 7 fights in a row, I'll tell the boss to give you a raise." "Get off, Hank!" Cody took the words as a joke and shook his head while laughing, high on the win of his last fight. "You're lying!" "No, I swear on my mother's grave." Hank put his hands on Cody's shoulders. "You know I could do it, too." "If I win 7 fights in a row?" "Well, you already have 3. Hank was watching my brother attentively, waiting for his answer. "You swear it?" Cody looked the man in the eye. 4 more wins, and I'll talk to the boss." Something told me it was a bad idea as Cody took Hank's hand and shook it enthusiastically. If it had been Ivy or Cole or even Donnie, I would have spoken up and cautioned them against making a deal in the pit, but I knew Cody would never listen to me. I swallowed hard and prayed that it would be okay. Several of Cody's friends came over to congratulate him on his win, so Cody was in high spirits as he approached me. He grabbed me by the shoulder and shook me excitedly. 3 wins in a row, kid! It's 'cause of that smile. You're my good luck charm." I smiled and nodded. "Come on, let's go home." The fights were over, and we were both okay. A rare and happy occurrence. We unwrapped our hands, grabbed our things from the shelves in the corner, and left. There was a text on my phone from Steven telling me to stay away from my teacher next time. I sighed and shoved my phone into my pocket. Careful to avoid the spot where the police car was idling on the edge of the neighborhood, we took the long way home. A cool breeze blew through the trees, carrying the smell of exhaust, burning trash, and faint whiffs of fresh air. Beside me, Cody seemed to be happy, and I was nervous to say anything in case I ruined it. I remembered the fist bump from before the fights, and I smiled. On Thursday, I failed a pop quiz in biology and had a group of teenage boys follow me down the hall, laughing loudly at my worn-out shoes and dirty clothes. I hated my shoes. When I arrived home, instead of going inside, I walked around the corner of the house and hopped over our fence into the backyard. Nothing was back there except a giant oak tree. It was thick and tall, its many branches laden heavily with deep green leaves. There wasn't much grass left growing under it because so little sunlight could reach down that far. Dry dirt crunched under my shoes. Dropping my backpack on the ground, I walked over to put my hand against the rough gray bark, pressing my fingers against the pattern. "Hi, Mom." I still remembered the first time we buried the ashes of a sibling under the tree. As she knelt by the tiny grave, Mother read from the Bible with tears running down her face. It was the first time death had touched our home, and my older sisters wept bitterly. I hadn't. There were notches carved into the tree for each person buried there, and in the Bible in the sitting room there was a page with their names written down, along with the cause of death. Reaching over, I ran my pointer finger down one of the grooves and recited the details. Javier, work accident. I touched the next one. Pearl, car accident. On down the tree I went until I had touched them all. Gavin, the rings. Carrie, pneumonia. Ginger, pneumonia. Dax, the rings. Mother, Sullivan Gray. The coroner's report said my mother had been killed by strangulation. My siblings didn't agree. Before I was born, Gray had done many terrible things to make my mother's life miserable. Sure, he hated all of South Cap, But with my mother, it was personal. He would cut off the electricity to the house, tell shop owners not to hire my siblings when they asked for jobs, and hinder the work she was doing to make the south side of Cap a better place. Randomly, the police would show up and interrogate her or search the house. And that's why, when her children started dying, Margaret Caroline always said Gray was behind it. I wasn't told details because I was just the youngest, but she had her reasons. Whether he did it on purpose, most deaths on our side of Cap were because of Sullivan Gray. People didn't have money for medicine or hospital stays, so they died. Men had to fight to earn money to feed their families, and sometimes they had accidents. Workers at the factory were forced to do their jobs in unsafe conditions, and Gray didn't do anything to fix them. My family was not unique in the way that they knew death, but they were unique in the way Sullivan Gray had hated our mother. "Hey, kid," a familiar voice called me softly. I turned and saw Finn at the fence, his arms resting on top of the wooden slats. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said as I hooked my backpack over my shoulder and walked slowly toward him. "You don't usually come back here." He was right, I didn't. Just a tough day at school, I guess. Opening the gate for me, Finn allowed me to pass without further questions. He gave my shoulder a small squeeze that let me know he knew that I was hiding more than I was saying. "Rory's at Yates tonight," he said as we walked around to the front of the house. "I'm going to need you guys to try to find some food." "She didn't get groceries?" Finn shook his head. "She bought food for Yates and his roommates." "Why? Yates has a job." "She loves him, kid. She's an adult. It's her money. Can't make her decisions for her." "What about us? We need our paycheck for our food. That's not—" "Arrow, stop." He and Donnie only used my real name when they were serious. "We'll be okay. I earned a little extra, and I know the dumpster behind West Cap Supermarket won't get emptied till morning. Between the four of you, you'll get enough." "I should try to get a job," I said for probably the 100th time since Ivy and Cole started working that summer. Ivy had tricked some ice cream shop in West Cap into hiring her despite the fact she was a Southie. Following in the footsteps of his brothers, Cole started at the factories, but only when there were extra jobs that needed to be done. When he wasn't at work, he could be found at the rundown arcade playing video games in the corner. I had nothing. "No, kid." Finn shook his head. "There's nothing you can do that will be safe." "What about the dollar store?" "Not while Drake Hubbard works there." Finn's tone said the conversation was over. Part of me was frustrated at the way Finn and Donnie were overprotective, but the other part of me remembered the grooves on the tree trunk. They were just trying to keep us all alive. Normally, the Kenway kids would find jobs during their sophomore year of high school. That changed when Mother died. Only Cody had been headstrong enough to take up a full-time position at the factory when he was a junior, telling Donnie and Finn that they couldn't stop him. So they hadn't. Still, we struggled to make ends meet regularly, especially when Rory spent the money we were counting on for food on her boyfriend. I pretended to do some homework at the kitchen table while waiting for Cody and Cole to return home from work. Our trek across Cap to the grocery store would probably only take a couple hours, depending on how active the police were that night. It was common for them to harass Southies who were out after dark, and we didn't want any problems. Ivy sat across from me at the table, actually doing homework, and texting Caden on her phone. When the boys came home, we put our books away, grabbed our empty backpacks to carry food back in. Donnie pressed a couple 20s into Cole's hand as we left the house. "I'm the oldest," said Cody, noticing that he wasn't the one given the money. "Then act like it," said Donnie with a shrug. "Whatever, I don't care." Cody jerked his jacket over his shoulders. "Let's go, guys. It'll be dark enough by the time we get to West Cap." We split into pairs to attract less attention as we made our journey. Ivy and I took the bus, while the boys cut through the lumberyard, where they knew the groundskeeper who would let them use the shortcut. We girls arrived first and went inside. Ivy needed new lipstick while I went to look at the shoes. My toes curled in my ratty old sneakers as I gazed covetously at the rows of brand new footwear that I would never own, while the echoes of the boys from school rang through my head. The bell over the door jingled, and my brothers walked in. "Come on," said Cody quietly as he walked behind me. "Let's see what we can find out back first." It was a good day for us, as we found barely moldy loaves of bread, canned food expired by only 3 days, and bulk items that had ripped open but were still mostly intact. rice, white beans, some weird gluten-free flour that Cole was doubtful would be any good to us, but Cody insisted we take anyway. Stop putting everything in my bag, said Ivy, pointing at Cody's empty one. Hush up, I have a plan. Cody's eyes lit up in the way that made me nervous. Cole, give me the money. Why? Cole was hesitant. Trust me, it's a good plan. But it's for our food. And we just found a bunch of food right here. Look, there's a whole box of Wheaties. Cody pointed into the corner of the dumpster. Arrow and I will meet you back home. My heart sank. I had a dreaded feeling that I knew where he wanted us to go. Where are you going? Asked Ivy. We'll meet you at home, Cody repeated forcefully. Cole, just give me the money. We'll bring home more than this when we're done. Are you going to the underground? Ivy asked, confirming my fear. Don't do this. You had one good night, Cody. Don't get cocky. We need this, said Cody harshly. This is for Mom. Well, you shouldn't go alone, and none of us want to go with you. She glanced at Cole, who was perched on the edge of the dumpster, misgiving in his eyes. Arrow wants to come. Cody nudged me with his elbow. I didn't want to go. Cody, you shouldn't go, said Cole seriously. Don't fight tonight. We'll meet you at home, shouted Cody in return as he grabbed my arm and pulled me behind. Cody, don't! Cole shouted, but Cody didn't stop. I didn't say anything as we dodged traffic and patrol cars. The night was humid and full of the roar of engines that whizzed past us. We were a block away when I realized, I don't have my wraps. I grabbed them. Cody slipped his backpack from his shoulders and unzipped it. Here. But what am I even going to do? No one sent me to the rings. I don't have a code. I have $40. You can fight for money. Cody, that's our food money. And we didn't have to spend it on food. Cody felt no remorse for his actions. Come on, Caden won over $100 last time. You just give your money to the guy, and when you won your fights, you go back and collect money from him. Besides, this is better because you'll be bringing home more money than Donnie gave us. I was nervous. I could feel my stomach twisting as we turned the corner to see the entrance of the building. Several other fighters entered with us. They all looked familiar, but I didn't know any of them. Quietly, I watched Cody as he joked and laughed with his friends while he wrapped his hands and put his jacket on one of the shelves. I was still struggling with my wraps when he spotted me out of the corner of his eye. Excusing himself from his friends, he joined me in my little corner. Without a word, he helped me with my last wrap. I looked up when he'd finished. We got this, Arrow. You're the best girl fighter I know. He gave me a grin and held out his fist. I bumped it with my own, remembering our happy moment from a couple days before. You're my good luck charm. You have to help me finish my winning streak. I tried to pull on the confidence Cody seemed to have in spades, but it didn't work for me. I didn't believe in luck. Miracles didn't happen for my family. Smile for me. I gave him a tiny smile, a quick one. There, now I'll win for sure. He grinned and jerked his head toward the middle of the room where the battles were held. The man who took my money raised an eyebrow at me, but I gave him my coldest stare, and he jotted my name down on a paper before pointing to the pit. It felt strange to be there twice in 1 week. After a quick sweep of my eyes over the other fighters around me, I ascertained that the boy from the last time wasn't there, and I sighed in relief. On the other side of the pit from me, Cody was being loud and brash, while Hank and his other friends egged him on. His name was called, and I prayed he would be safe. I was paired with a girl, a rare occurrence. Assuming she had chosen the rings instead of going to jail, I judged her as an easy win. She could be a surprise, I warned myself as I stepped in and waited to hear the starting bell. Whatever she was, she didn't look afraid of me. I soon realized it was for good reason. She beat me. Then she beat me again. Angrily, I went to the water cooler in the corner of the pit and downed a cup of water. They were fights I could have won. I should have won. One more loss and there would be no chance of winning any of our money back. Rattled and irritated, I glanced around to find Cody. I needed him to help me refocus. Wiping the sweat from my forehead, I peered into the ring farthest away. There was a man on the ground, blood and sweat pouring from his head as he lay motionless. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. As I pushed through the clump of men staring at the spectacle, every nerve in my body tingled. I wriggled through the ropes and threw myself down by the body. It was Cody. The crowd was cheering on the victor as I stared in stunned silence. A rough hand pulled me back, snapping my head on my neck and causing my teeth to crack, top row against the bottom. "Stay out of the ring! Fight on your own!" a voice roared in my ear. "Get back over there!" "But Cody!" I screamed over the sound of jeering and chanting. "Looks like he lost!" They tossed me into a ring, and I was faced with someone much bigger than me. In horror, I saw the blood on his hands and heard the chanting follow me. The crowd was all there, all watching, all calling out that I was going to lose, just like my brother. Realization chilled me to the bone. I was about to fight the man who had just rendered Cody unconscious. "Fight! Fight! Fight!" The other fighters in the pit were just as riled up as the crowd on the other side of the room. Hank's smug face was there in the midst of the action, and my blood boiled. Money forgotten, I threw myself at my opponent, screaming at the top of my voice. A roar of approval deafened me until I shut it out. I masked my tears with the sweat pouring from my brow and landed blow after blow on the man's face and neck. He smacked me around, watching me rattle across the ring like a rag doll, with obvious pleasure in his dark, beady eyes. I refused to give up, and I refused to lose, but in the end I found myself huddled in the corner to protect myself from the man's giant and merciless blows. No one cared if I was alive, as they rejoiced in their champion 2 times over. I wept silently into my hands as I crouched on the ground, blood trickling from my nose. Cheers thundered around me until they were interrupted by the sound of the giant doors being opened. Footsteps echoed off the walls as the crowd left and the fighters exited the pit to find their things. No one paid me any attention, not even to tell me to leave. No one cared about the orphans. If we were still there in the morning, they would throw us into the woods. They did that with all the unclaimed bodies. I crawled from my ring that was splattered with my blood and spit and dragged myself over to my brother. His face was cold to my touch, and I cursed his stubborn pride. "Cody?" I placed a shaking hand on his chest where I knew his heart was. With immense concentration, I calmed myself and my own pounding heartbeat enough to feel the faintest of movements in Cody's body. "Cody, wake up!" As if knowing it was finally safe, Cody flickered his eyes open and found my face. He tried to smile, but his face was too badly mangled that he could hardly move his mouth. I placed a hand softly on his cheek and watched him lean into my warmth. Tears sprang into my eyes as I saw his flutter close again, the normally bright brown irises cloudy and run through with red from broken blood vessels. "Cody? No, Cody!" I put my own pain aside and attempted to pull the young man onto my lap, to cradle his broken body in my arms. His head rolled limply to the side. Panic rose up in my stomach with a flash of nausea. I turned my head and vomited away from my brother, watching the blood on the floor mix with what had come out of my stomach. A weak whisper reached my ears. "Cody?" I struggled to pull him closer, every muscle in my body screaming with pain. "It's okay. I'm here." The gibberish didn't make sense, and I shook my head at him, tears ruining my view. I don't know what you're saying, I cried angrily. All I could make out was the word kid, the name my older brothers had been using for me since I was in diapers. "I'm sorry. I wasn't your good luck charm this time." A door slammed behind me and I jumped, wiping at my tears with the back of my hand, smearing blood and grime on my face. Loud voices joined us, and I felt another wave of nausea roll steadily over me until I was sure I was green in the face. We picked up some of the trash from the ground and made coarse jokes that caused my face to burn. There was no way they couldn't have seen me holding Cody in the middle of the ring, but they acted as though I was invisible. 20 minutes passed slowly, and I wasn't sure if Cody was breathing anymore. A cold darkness filled the room when the men departed, leaving me alone with the body of my brother. He was clammy to the touch, and there had been no sign of life for almost an hour now. I sat there next to him in the dark, begging God for the morning light. I wasn't given morning light, but the light of a flashlight eventually flickered into view as Finn came running over. Ah, stupid, spat Finn angrily as he stared down at the lifeless body of her brother. I should have come the second Ivy and Cole came home without you. I lost our money, I whispered, hardly daring to utter the words. I was in a state of shock, and that was all I could think about. I'm sorry, Finn. It's okay, Arrow. I know you fought hard. I couldn't beat them. I heard my voice crack and hoped that Finn hadn't. Let's go home. Finn's voice sounded thick, but with the beam of the light in my eyes, I couldn't see his face. He wrapped his jacket around me and helped me move to the pit, going slow as I limped in pain. I waited for him to pull Cody from the ring and lift him over his shoulder. We went out the way we came in, the door left unlocked. The moon was bright in the sky and followed us all the way home. I carried Cody's jacket and said nothing. It's not your fault, Arrow, said Finn as we approached home. It's not your fault. I didn't answer. It had been Cody's pride and stupidity that cost him his life. I hadn't been able to avenge his death. I hadn't saved him. I hadn't even understood his last words. Go to bed. Don't worry about school in the morning, Finn ordered once we were home. Ivy was waiting for me, her arms open and her hands soothing to my brow. I buried my face in her shoulder and clung to her for dear life. Sleep finally claimed us as the sun painted a new day on the horizon. When I awoke, Ivy was gone, and the sun was up. And Arrow is the Sun by Bailey A. Osborne. Chapter 3. It was the nightingale, and not the lark. For 4 days I didn't leave the house. Burying Cody's ashes under the tree felt wrong. We hadn't had a death since Mother, and all of us were shaken by the overwhelming sense of loss. For over 17 years Cody had been there. Now suddenly he wasn't. Trembling, I forced myself to keep my eyes open as my brothers shoveled dirt back into the small grave. Finn said a prayer while Ivy held my hand tightly, the sleeve of her black sweater slipping down over where our fingers met. Cole spent the rest of the evening making Cody's notch in the bark, silent tears streaming down his face. Taking the Bible down from its place, Donnie wrote Cody's name and cause of death on the special page. After he closed the book, he leaned his head in his hands and wept. Donnie spent Monday evening sitting outside my room with his textbooks. Sometimes when I watched Donnie study, I felt bad that I was letting him down with my grades. Mother would have expected more of me, but Mother wasn't there. On Tuesday, I was given a new outfit to wear to school, and Ivy carefully masked my bruises and cuts with makeup before leaving the house 10 minutes before me to walk with Caden. I caught up with her, but kept on the other side of the road, ignoring the way she and Caden held hands and flirted. Hey, you're back at school! A voice broke through the throng of students that filled the school hallways after third period. I didn't see you on Friday or yesterday. Hi, I said with a forced smile as I glanced over my shoulder at Roe Richardson. He was wearing a mustard yellow sweater with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and there was what appeared to be the smudge of eyeliner around his eyes. I knit my eyebrows together in question, but he didn't notice. Where were you? He leaned against the locker next to mine and watched me switch out my books. Were you sick? Are you going to tell me the end of the Roland and June story? I didn't feel like conversing. What? Ro was perplexed. I don't know a story about Roland and June. The story, the one you were telling me about? I watched his blank expression. They were in love, but their families hated each other. Oh, Romeo and Juliet! Ro smiled, then snickered. Roland and June. Well, you gonna tell me? I shut my locker and leveled my gaze into his eyes. Of course not. You have to read it for yourself. Then I'm not going to tell you why I was gone for 2 days. Cody's ashen and blood-smeared face flashed through my memory. I still felt queasy when I thought about it. Spinning too quickly in my haste to leave the boy, I lost my balance. Reaching over to steady me, Ro watched me with worry. I'm fine, I said. You look really pale. He leaned closer to examine my face. Self-conscious about the injuries underneath the caked-on foundation and concealer, I recoiled, a panicky look in my eye. Immediately he stepped back to give me my space. He opened his mouth to say something, but the bell rang, its shrill tone bringing dread and relief at the same time. I spotted him leaving school hurriedly at the end of the day, his backpack straps gripped tightly and head down. For a moment I considered chasing after him, but the pain in my body dismissed the idea for me. I trailed along behind him, watching him grow gradually smaller as the space between us grew from half a block to a full block, then two. He turned a corner, and I didn't see him again. There was nothing of interest on the street that Roe had disappeared down, so I was left to guess. Had he slipped into the bakery? The dry cleaners? Or maybe he was at the hardware store with the broken window? I left the corner and continued home. Did it go okay? Finn stopped me in the hallway. Any problems? Just my math teacher telling me I needed a doctor's note. I answered in a casual tone. Okay, I'll make one. Finn nodded and headed to his room to write one up for me. How's school, kid? Donnie was sitting in the broken armchair in the sitting room. The sitting room had always been called that since I could remember. We had long white silk curtains in the window, discolored from years of being handled and torn from being pulled across broken windows. In the corner, our couch was balanced on stacks of books, since 3 of the legs had fallen off when my brothers were little and used to wrestle on its dark brown cushions. Wet shoes and grubby hands had touched every pillow, marking the fabric with the stories of each child who had spent any amount of time within the walls of that house. I found the tear from my own story, the one time I had slept on the couch when Ivy and I were fighting over something silly back in 3rd grade. I had ripped the fabric with the zipper of my jacket. As for the large frayed rug on the floor and the chipped paint on the walls, I didn't remember their original colors. All that was left was an extremely faded gray color. There was one painting on the wall of a desert with a blooming cactus. None of us had ever been to the desert before, but I dreamed about it sometimes. Any fights? Any comments? Donnie brought me back to the present. His sandy blonde hair was sticking up in the front from the bandage that was still wrapped carefully round his head. There was a smear of something on his freckled cheek under his sharp cheekbone. The chair looked narrow, filled with his broad-shouldered and strong-muscled body. I returned my eyes to his light blue gaze. I could feel the same safety there that I had felt since the first time I stared up at him as a baby. No, Dirk was smart enough to leave me alone. I shook my head and stepped closer. All normal. Normal? Donnie asked, a scoff in his expression, then softness. It won't be normal. Can't be. Not after you watch your brother die. Donnie, jeez! I felt a lump expand in my throat as he spoke, tears wetting my view and keeping me rooted to the floor. Don't talk like that! We have to, Arrow, said Donnie quietly. If we hold it in, we die too. In anger and bitterness? I won't let you do that. Don't want to talk about it, Donnie. I stared down at my ugly shoes. Okay, but one day you'll have to. He sounded so matter-of-fact I wasn't about to question him. His textbook sat in his lap, a pencil in his hand, ready to scribble out notes on the tiny scraps of paper he hoarded away for his studies. There were so many people in our neighborhood who could barely read, I being one of them, and Donnie stood out of this group of people with the brilliance to match his strength and cunning. When Mother died, he had been our self-appointed leader without discussion, and he had our undying devotion. I took the note that Finn made for me to school the next day. The teacher was satisfied, as she always was with Finn's forgeries, and the day flowed smoothly. By the time the final bell rang at the end of the day, I had a raging headache behind my temples. I grabbed my things and started for the big doors at the end of the hall. My classmates were loud and rough as they shouted, threw footballs, and shoved their way through the crowds of teenagers. All I wanted was to go home and lay on my bed with a cool cloth over my burning eyes. I was about to step outside and escape the madness when someone stopped me. Hey, you want a flyer? Stopping in my tracks, I turned to look. Rissa stood with a stack of bright pink flyers and an uncertain smile. Surprised, I gave her a questioning look. We had never interacted before. What made this particular cause so important that she felt the need to stop me? I held out my hand and took the paper she pressed against my palm. Reading wasn't my strong suit, but I saw a picture of a baby rabbit, and I could guess what it was about. What the hell? I narrowed my eyes at her. What is this? It's a petition to stop the killing of rabbits in public parks. The groundskeepers often kill baby rabbits if they find them, and it's terrible. Would you like to? Do you think I care about baby rabbits? I shoved the paper back at her. She blinked her big blue eyes in shock. But they're just babies, she said, aghast. No, they're just rabbits, I snapped, my voice drowned out by everyone swirling through the exit around us. Last week, my brother died in an illegal fight trying to earn a raise at work. He died in my arms. Tears pressed hot against my eyes, and I blinked the first batch of tears down my cheeks. So yeah, I don't give a shit about baby rabbits. Rissa's mouth was hanging open as I spun around on my heel and left. The voice in the back of my head told me I shouldn't have done that. I don't care, I thought as I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand and hurried down the sidewalk. Cody was my brother, and he was worth more than all the baby rabbits in the world. Slipping into an empty alleyway, I crouched down and wept. It was Friday after school, and I could see Ro half a block in front of me as I headed home. Unable to close the distance between us, I called his name. I didn't even know why. Arrow? He was clearly surprised to see me. He waited as I caught up, glancing down at the time on his phone as he did. Where are you going? I asked. He shrugged. I have something I have to go to a few blocks away. My dad said it didn't make sense to come all the way to school just to drive me 5 blocks when I could walk. You don't live close to here? Well, sort of, just in the opposite direction. Rose shook his head and glanced at his phone again. He frowned and returned his attention to me. I have to go. I can't be late. Can I join? I'm headed this way. His answer was wordless as he moved his shoulders with uncertainty and continued on. A cool wind blew against our faces when we reached the first corner, and I welcomed the scent of fall that it carried. Things were cooling down, but slowly, only becoming cool in the dead of night when it was so cold I would often wake up shivering. The trees lining our path waved gently and kindly, as if watching us walk quietly beside each other. A few leaves had begun to lead the change from green to flaming red and burnt orange. I gathered my courage to glance at Rose's face. The dark smudge of makeup was less, but still there. I'm sorry for the other day, I said cautiously. You know, when I snapped at you. Thanks. Ro nodded thoughtfully before peering down at me. Sorry if I was being too much. It wasn't you. I hurried to correct him. I was having a bad day. Someone I knew died. There was an audible gasp that left Rose's lips, drifting away on the breeze as his feet stopped. I studied him as he stared straight ahead, seeing nothing. The lump in my throat threatened to push achingly against the sides as it swelled in size in response to thinking about Cody. I'd pictured him 100 times, each time trying to translate his last words. Smile for me, he had said before we headed to the rings. There, now I'll win for sure. I closed my eyes, but not quick enough to hide the tears. I sucked in my bottom lip and bit it to keep from letting them fall. A hand touched my shoulder, and I blinked my eyes open. I'm sorry. I could see every speck of green and brown dancing together in his eyes behind a sheen of emotions. It reminded me of my mother, the way she would cry freely, even in front of strangers. I never understood how people could do that. Clearing my throat, I straightened and pressed my feelings away. Thanks. Yeah. Ro wiped his eyes. I thought you didn't want to talk to me because I had asked you about the underground fights. Oh, right. I had forgotten about that. My dad said people from the south side of the city are touchy about it, Ro continued. How does your dad know that? I asked cautiously. He works at the lumber yard with a lot of Southies. I know. If it was a manual labor job, the majority of employees were from the south side of Cap. I won't ask you about it anymore, but I got this book from the library. My dad found it for me, and apparently it's a book all about the guy who started the fights, by Frederick Baum. Have you heard of it? The infamous tell-all written after Old Gray died in the late 90s. I nodded. Is it accurate? Is it a good source of information? Swallowing hard, I looked away. I told you, I don't read books. Has anybody else read it? I want to make sure the information is good. We should keep walking. Don't want you to be late, I said with a nod toward the destination, wherever that was. I sniffed and used the back of my already dirty sleeve to wipe my eyes that were a little bit more wet than normal. After walking half a block in awkward silence, I offered, I heard it's fine. What? He asked. The book? It's okay. Oh, right. Thanks, Arrow. We walked for another block, moving at a brisk pace to make up for lost time. Desperately searching for something to say, I racked my brain to find anything to share with my companion. I thought about how Caden and Ivy were always talking and smiling at each other. How did they do that? What did people talk about? This was the first time I had spent time with a classmate outside of school. Suddenly I remembered why. I'm going to practice, said Ro, as if he knew I wanted to break the silence. Oh? I watched him out of the corner of my eye as we walked briskly down the sidewalk. I'm part of a ballet. The words were hard and choppy, as if meant to break down the judgments of those who would come after his decision. I'm gonna be in a performance. My eyes traced him from his shoulders to his toes. He was so athletic and thin, muscular and fine, all at the same time. All I could picture were tiny girls in pink frills with red lips, brighter than Ivy's favorite shade. Boys do that? Of course boys do that. His tone sounded almost scornful, as though he had assumed me more clever than I had just proved myself to be in that moment. My dad did ballet. My uncles Alex and Peter did ballet their whole lives, basically. What do they do? Confusion marked my face, and I could see Ro beginning to regret his decision of telling me where he was going. I thought it was just for girls. Well, they do the roles of the men, obviously. Prince Charming, Albrecht, the Nutcracker Prince, Romeo. There are numerous roles for them. Romeo? I turned with recognition of the name. The Romeo from, yeah. Ro nodded. He shoved his hands into his pockets and grew pensive for a moment. That's the show I'm in, by the way, Romeo and Juliet. It's a ballet? Yeah, I figured you might want to watch the story more than read it, and if I'm in it, then I can get you a ticket. Really? A tiny prick of something warm and unexpected swirled in my stomach. If you want. Ro pulled a hand free from his jeans and rubbed it across his neck. You'll be dancing in it? I still couldn't shake the picture of the little girls in pink from my mind. Yeah, I didn't make Romeo, which, no surprise there. I've been slacking in my practicing since we moved here. I haven't actually been in a show since I was 12, I think, when I spent the summer with my uncles in London. Anyway, I'm in the dance corps. The what? It's like the ensemble, I guess you could call it. I don't know that word. I felt embarrassed by my confession, but Ro was kind. It just means I'm in the group of people who dance in the big scenes. Big enough role for my dad to call my aunt to watch. Now it was Ro's turn to be embarrassed. He ducked his head bashfully and chuckled softly at himself. She'll be sure to tell me all about how good she was at ballet when she was my age. My mom, too. Does everybody you know dance? I could hardly keep up with the amount of names he was rattling off. Well, Ro paused thoughtfully. You don't dance. I scoffed lightly at his answer. We reached the corner where he had turned on Monday, and we stopped. I glanced down the road, wondering if I could guess which dark old building was the one Ro needed. There were none marked with ballet or dance. Do you? Ro shifted on his feet as though uncomfortable with the thoughts in his own mind. Do you want to sneak in and watch rehearsal? What? I was taken aback by the invitation. I didn't think you'd be somebody who suggested sneaking into places. I'm not, said Ro with an embarrassed laugh, but if you've never seen a man dance ballet, I think you should know. Won't watching you practice give away the story before the big show? I asked. No, of course not. We're not a company. We're just doing a show. Romeo and Juliet and the other big roles practice separately of the dance corps. You'll just watch me and a bunch of other guys dance around. Sounds very exciting, I deadpanned. You don't have to. Ro's cheeks flushed. I guess I should know what a man doing ballet looks like. The pleased look in Ro's eyes as he turned could not be missed. I watched him walk to the door of the third building from the corner. Pausing, he stopped and retraced his steps, jogging back to where I stood. I suppose you could slip up into the. I know how to sneak into a building, Ro, I said with a shake of my head. Now go, you're probably late or something by now. Ro's eyes darted to his phone, and he turned to race back to the door of the building. I could hear him shouting his apologies as the door shut behind him with a click. 40 seconds ticked past before I strolled around to the fire escape. I tossed my backpack up on the first landing before jumping easily and grabbing hold of the rung. Pain tore through my bad shoulder, but I clamped my mouth shut and kept quiet. The climb to the roof was simple enough, a maneuver I had done before, and that allowed me to slip inside without raising alarm or suspicion. There was an upper level balcony that had a view of the darkened stage. I crept noiselessly into a row, setting my backpack by my feet. All of a sudden, lights flicked on in the entire theater, and I slumped down to avoid detection should anyone's eyes be on the gallery. After a murmur of voices grew into a distant babble of conversation, drifting upward from the stage, I slowly lifted myself. A number of young men were there, dressed in nothing but black tights and white t-shirts. Standing in a smart formation, they seemed to be anticipating an order. I leaned forward, interest growing with every new detail I soaked in. Their feet were askew as they stood, and their arms were clasped behind their backs. A very short man stood in front of them, speaking passionately and jumping about with impressive energy. On their feet they had some sort of slipper. At first there was no music, just the small instructor barking out words and phrases that most of the boys on the stage seemed to understand, though they were spoken in a language I was not familiar with. Ro was in the group of those who understood, and several times throughout the class he bent closer to the figure next to him, possibly explaining what the teacher meant. It wasn't until the music was added that I saw the magic of it. This was not little girls in pink tutus with red lips. This was a fighting dance. The dancers on the stage wove in and out of each other as they played out what I could only determine was a battle scene. It was awkward, and many of the boys forgot their next move, much to the chagrin of the little man who shouted at them. But I had nothing to compare it to aside from the fights in the rings. Compared to those, this was almost beautiful. Time slipped by so unnoticed by myself that I was surprised when I heard the small man in charge telling them all to leave the stage, that he was done with them for the day, and he hoped that they put in some effort next time they came to practice. I glanced at my phone and gasped. I had barely enough time to make it home before anyone started to worry. I typed out a quick text to Donnie that I was on my way home and snuck quietly back out of the building. Outside, I could see the sky turning a blush pink and bruised purple color, and I hurried. Being out after dark meant trouble, and everyone would be quick to assume the worst after Cody's death. "Hey kid, thought you'd be home earlier," said Donnie from the front step as I rounded the last corner. He only sat on the front step if he was anxious for someone to return. Were you waiting for me?" I asked breathlessly. I gulped down mouthfuls of air and smoothed my shirt. The back of it had a wet patch of perspiration. You were pushing it," said Donnie with a flick of his eyebrows. "It's Friday night." I nodded. Friday nights were dangerous in South Cap because that was the only night the underground wasn't open to the public. Most of the police force was on the east side of Cap for the very legal and highly anticipated Friday night fights at Sullivan's, leaving the southeast to go crazy. Shopkeepers stayed in their shops all night just to keep thieves out. It was also the night when someone could grab you off the street, take you to the underground, and demand a fight. Wisely, my siblings and I stayed inside on those nights. I hadn't even reached the front door when there was a call from behind me. "Hey, orphans! Are you going to come avenge your brother?" Dottie said nothing, just stood to his feet and gave them a solemn shake of his head. We were not. Mother wouldn't want it that way. "Don't let them win by becoming like them," she would tell us. "We don't have to stoop to their level." That's probably why my mother stood out so much in that neighborhood, because of her noble ideals. She had dreams. She had vision, passion, and wanted so much more than to be like those around her. For part of her life, she lived with a nice family on the west side of Cap. They paid for her education, what she pursued as if it were the very air she needed to breathe. Her pursuit took her to an out-of-state college where she majored in English and minored in social justice. When her teachers no longer had anything left to teach, she went to the library and spent hours and hours poring over books. But in the midst of it all, She clung to her sassy roots, and once graduation day was over, she moved herself back into the battered old neighborhood. She could have had it all, they said, but she chose us. "Aw, come on, don't be all Maggie C on us," the man jeered from the street. His companion agreed with a sneering laugh. "Good night," said Donnie firmly. I could see the way his jaw was working as he held himself back. Maggie C was what people called her mother. Now, Maggie C was what they called people who didn't want to fight. "Don't want to disappoint your dear dead mother?" "Come on, Arrow," Donnie said, turning away from the men standing on the street. "Let's go inside." I wasn't completely convinced that Donnie would have ignored the taunts if his head hadn't been bandaged. That suspicion was confirmed when Finn came to the door before we could go inside. "What's going on?" he asked. "Talking about Mom," said Donnie tightly. Finn's eyes flashed as he looked at the men in question. They had begun to walk away until they saw Finn join us. Anticipating a reaction, they stopped and retraced their steps. "Asked if we were going to avenge Cody," I added. "Hey!" they called from the street. "Leave us alone!" Finn hollered at them. "Aw, come on! Was your brother not worth it? Are you happy that idiot is gone?" "Yeah, what? Did you pay Hank to kill him off?" That was all it took. Donnie didn't try to hold Finn back as he rushed from the house to where the men were waiting with smirks on their dirty, angry faces. The sound of my backpack dropping to the porch registered in my hearing before I even realized I was running across the yard. "Arrow, no!" Donnie tried to stop me, but I was already gone. I fought blindly, jumping on the back of one of the men while Finn took care of the other one. A crowd formed quickly, and a myriad of voices consumed my senses until I drowned them out by focusing on the man's face. The pain of the man's blows on my back and shoulders didn't stop me. Hands gripped me and pulled me away until I was left swinging at the air. "Take this to the rings!" people were shouting, breaking up the fights. "Take it to the underground!" A protective hand reached over and rested heavily on my shoulder. I looked to see Finn, his dark hair a mess and his eyes blazing. Donnie was there, shouting and shoving at someone who was gesturing wildly. Pain was throbbing in my bad shoulder as I jerked myself away from the strangers holding me back. They weren't really strangers, just the neighbors who had never liked us. Slowly, I realized there was an argument going on. "We don't have to go to the rings," Donnie was saying. "They have to. We're challenging them to a fight." To my right, I saw Ivy and Caden run out of the house and stand gawking in the yard. I knew the moment Ivy spotted me because she dropped Caden's hand and began pushing through the crowd to reach us. There was too much commotion happening for people to pay attention to Ivy's arrival. She latched onto my arm and had to talk into my ear to be heard. "What's going on?" "They were saying things about Cody," I said. "Now they want us to finish the fights in the rings." "No, not the underground, Arrow." "It's just the underground." I tried to sound unbothered, but my gut was in knots. Surely Donnie would be able to win the argument. "Let's go, girls." Finn grabbed us both by our elbows and ushered us back through our yard and inside. "Go get changed." "What?" Ivy's mouth fell open. "The fights are in an hour. Get changed." Finn's voice was abnormally hard. "Come on." Taking Ivy's hand, I led her upstairs to our bedroom before she could say anything else. I shut the door behind us, but I could hear Donnie calling for Cole to come downstairs. We were all going. "I don't like the thought of you at the underground tonight," said Ivy 5 minutes later as she ran 2 braids down the back of my head. It helped to calm us both. "They'll be hard on you." "We have to go. They challenged us." I could feel her hand shaking as she reached forward to have me hand her a rubber band. "Not like you to be scared of the fights, Ivy." "It's the first fight after a death, Arrow. Of course I'm scared. Don't pretend that none of us aren't feeling this. Cody was our brother. They're going to use that against us." "Don't let them get to you, Ivy." I knew she struggled to ignore the crowds when she fought. It was her biggest weakness. "Their words can't get you." "Yes, they can," said Ivy angrily. "You know they can." "You can do it," I said with conviction. "You're stronger than you used to be." I heard her crying behind me as she continued to braid. I did nothing, said nothing, as we sat in the dark. Outside our house was the noise of people waiting. Finn and Donnie were calling to each other from downstairs. In just a few minutes we would have to leave. but for a few moments we soaked in the nervous thrum of anticipation. As we emerged from the house, chants and jeers erupted from the crowd in the street. They began to run ahead toward the underground. I was aware of every step I took, and every breath I pulled through my nose. Next to me was Donnie. He promised he wouldn't fight because of his injury, but he wanted to be there to protect us somehow. Ivy walked with her hand wrapped in Caden's tight grip. Finn didn't let me out of his sight as we walked into the familiar stink and echo of the underground room. No one was there to check codes on our phones or keep records of our fights. Friday nights were all off the books. After wrapping his hands, Finn helped me wrap mine. I glanced over my shoulder to check on Ivy, but Caden was with her, wrapping her hands carefully. I licked my lips nervously and turned back to face my brother. Without a word, he stared at me hard. The solidarity I saw in his hazel eyes almost made me melt, but I turned the feeling into strength, then confidence. I held my head high and my shoulders back, the way Mother had taught me. Cody was there in my mind, giving me a reason to fight harder. I kept him only on the edge, though, barring him from entrance into my concentration that could cost me the fight. As soon as we were in the pit, my name was called. I stepped into the middle ring and saw the sea of people all staring at me. There was to be only one fight at a time that night, and the audience was our own people. No one was there to bet, and no one was there because they had to be, but because they wanted to see the orphans fight in honor of their dead brother. All the pain people were all on the other side of the city at the real fights. The man who had been appointed as ringmaster stood to the side, allowing everyone time to shout and scream at me. People rushed into the building, and I focused on the back wall. It was all an attempt to rattle me, to throw me off my stride. They wanted to see the girl who had come with the boy who died. My first opponent was a large man. His muscles bulged, and his face went red as he growled and bellowed out insults in my direction. Behind me, Finn, Caden, and Ivy were screaming at the ringmaster that he was out of his mind. Ahead of me, right next to the ring, Donnie's face was pressed as close as it could be. When he noticed my gaze, he nodded at me. He had taught me how to fight. He knew what I was capable of. Starting with my hearing, I let the dimming process begin. Soon, the only senses I was using were my sight and my touch. Jerkily, the ringmaster raised his hand to start the match. The floor shook beneath my feet as the man leapt into action. I felt so small as the massive shape of the man rushed at me. Fear bubbled inside the pit of my stomach as I used my smaller size to my advantage, slipping under and around him. Grabbing onto him from behind, I landed blows on his head before he could rip me from his shoulders and dangle me in front of him as if I were little bigger than a worm. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that if he dropped me, I could die. Blood rushed to my brain as I pummeled my fist desperately against any part of his body I could reach. One of my legs slipped loose from his hand, and I brought it forward in one swift kick to his face. He shouted curses and dropped me to the ground. My hands broke my fall, and I felt my shoulder bash against the hard ground as I somersaulted to my feet again. I had survived. A roar filled my ears as the man sprang back to his feet, and he turned on me. The look in his eyes was thirsty for blood, and I had little hope of denying him. Stars danced in front of my face as I flew across the ring from the force of his blow to my cheek. I was surprised my bones were still joined together when I landed in a heap. That blow, however, was what led to my triumph over my foe. He clearly assumed that I was done, and the fight was his as he interacted with the crowd, screaming at them to cheer louder for his victory. Against a girl? A girl half his size? With one last-ditch effort, I lunged at him, grabbing his legs and forcing him to the ground, where I made quick work to snatch hold of his head and smash it against the cold floor. The move stunned him enough to give me the victory, and the night was off to the start I had hardly dared to imagine was possible. My legs were shaking as I made my way back to the pit, where I was crushed in the arms of my brothers and sister. Ivy had tears and makeup running down her face as she held me until I pushed away. "Careful of her injuries," Finn said, tapping Ivy on the shoulder so she would release me. He was beaming when I looked at him. "You did it, kid." Finn fought next. He fought hard and fast and won. Finn was lucky enough to have a job at the airport, which meant he wasn't sent to the underground by his boss, but he'd had his fair share of fights growing up as a teenager in South Cap. By this time, the crowd was tripled in size beyond what I had ever seen before. Word was running fast that the fights were with the orphans because of the boy who had died last week. And this was why I hated the book that Ro was reading about Old Gray. Because that book, about the terrible things done on the south side of Cap, was what inspired Sullivan Gray to follow in his father's footsteps. He snuck into the factories and the warehouses, finding those who would buy his fake promises and follow him. He built his empire by paying the salary of over half the police force, buying the local newspaper, and placing his longtime best friend over the television news station. No one could get a word to the public without going through his safety net. Then he struck. Poison Ivy! The name echoed as the next fighter was announced. You got this, I said quickly as she left the pit, her trembling hand leaving mine as she walked away. Ivy wasn't usually called on for her fighting abilities, but for her beauty. I wasn't sure if she knew that, so I never told her. She did fight, and she fought well. We had been trained together. The crowd never jeered at her for losing, though. They only protested when she lost her pretty face because of a blow to the nose or a busted lip. Because of that, Ivy won most fights, but she wasn't chosen often. A thunderous roar of approval shook the basement when she appeared, whistles and catcalls filling the space between the concrete walls. The sound crawled over my skin and gave me a bitter taste in my mouth. Clenching his jaw, Caden shut his eyes. Out of sight on the other side of the rings, I could only imagine what Donnie looked like, but Finn was red-faced with anger. Watching Ivy fight was almost worse than fighting myself. Her opponent seemed to be in the ring mostly for fun, testing her reflexes and her strength, giving her nods of unwanted approval when she impressed him. He gave a quick punch towards her chin, and she blocked him expertly. The crowd oohed as the man smirked. Sick of his leering and patronizing, Ivy punched him square in the face and kicked his side before he could block himself. Go, Ivy! I cheered along with the crowd. With a grimace, the man wiped at the blood on his mouth. He wasn't pleased. Ivy took his hits and fought back as I bit my bottom lip nervously. Clearly, he was done playing around. There was a solid smack against Ivy's cheek, and a jab to her side that left her breathless. Come on, Ivy, you got this! I shouted. In less than a minute, the fight had turned, and the man had his arm wrapped around Ivy's neck in a chokehold. Kaden rushed at the ring, shouting at her how to get herself out of the man's grip. Unable to free herself, Ivy tapped out. He released her, allowing her to fall to her knees, coughing and wheezing. She lost the fight, but no one cared. They just wanted to see a pretty face. Are you okay, Ivy? Let me see your neck. Kaden held her gently by the shoulders when she returned to the pit. Yeah, just... Ivy's voice was hoarse. I'll get you some water. I pointed to the water cooler and plastic cups in the corner of the pit. I was too distracted with Ivy and making sure she was okay that I didn't notice the crowd until the chanting began to grow. Maggie C! Maggie C! Maggie C! What? Ivy and I looked around. Maggie C! Maggie C! They called on Cole, said Caden. He doesn't want to fight. Cole was standing with his head down and refusing to move. I watched him with panic growing in my chest. Out of all of Margaret Caroline's children, Cole had fought the least amount of times. Twice. His quiet demeanor left him unnoticed by most, and his dutiful obedience kept him from being disliked by his superiors. Fighting had always scared him, and he would do anything to avoid it. Finn was talking to him, his mouth pressed close to his ear, and his hand holding onto his arm. Shaking his head, Cole told Finn no. He's not part of this! Finn shouted to the ringmaster as he left Cole where he stood, his shoulders hunched in fear. Maggie C! Maggie C! Maggie C! I hate that they're using Mom's name like that. Ivy crossed her arms over her chest. She was better than all of them. Let me fight in his place, Finn was yelling. I'm the one who you challenged, not him. Fine, come fight. The ringmaster nodded. Then we want her again, too. He was pointing at me. Sorry, said Cole in a soft voice. What for? I gave him a sharp look. Why are you sorry? You have to fight again, 'cause His voice cut off, and I noticed how pale his cheeks were. Cole, stop! I gave him a shove, angry that he felt badly for something he didn't do. Angry that these men made him feel guilty when it was their fault. Don't say that. Besides, I was the one who fight the guys in the street. He said nothing. Cole, I'm serious. I saw the tears brimming in his eyes as he stared at the floor and bit his knuckle to keep himself from crying. It's not your fault. I just. Cole blinked rapidly. Cody was such a good fighter. I'm not. And if he died. Shut up, I said fiercely, because I was fiercely protective of Cole. I'll fight. I wanted to fight everyone and make them leave my family alone. Instead of me, however, they called up Caden next. I wasn't worried about the 6'3", 210-pound fighter, but Ivy pulled on a strand of her hair nervously. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Finn put an arm around Cole's shoulder briefly. Cole nodded and straightened until he was standing tall again. Finn was good like that. I've never seen a crowd this big, Finn said into my ear as he joined me. Don't let your guard down. Who do you think I'll fight? I asked, glancing at the men discussing something while pointing at a fight roster between them. I don't know. Finn eyed them warily. You okay? I'm fine. I nodded. There was a dramatic pause after Caden's fight ended. The lights dimmed and the crowd went quiet. Chills ran down my spine at the change in atmosphere. I stood frozen in my place, every nerve ending tingling in anticipation of hearing my name called out by the ringmaster. Everyone in the audience on the other side of the rings seemed to know something that was happening. A murmur began to ripple through the silence until the word was clearly discernible. Giant! 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 No, 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 no. Finn began shaking his head. No, not giant! Arrow! My name was called, and I had to go. Arrow! My brother called after me, but I couldn't stop. Arrow, no! I suddenly understood my brother's fear when I stepped into the ring and a large shadow moved toward me. It was a man, my foe. With a buzz of electricity, the lights flickered back up to full brightness, and I found myself staring at a face I had seen in my nightmares. This was the man who killed Cody. I couldn't breathe. The crowd was going wild, basically rabid, screaming for me to fight the man simply because they took sick satisfaction in watching a teenage girl be mauled by a monster. And all this for no other reason than because a rich, powerful family decided to play God and create a city full of hate. Old Gray had done it, and now his son was doing the same thing. By working us to the bone and charging us prices we couldn't afford for things we needed, he made us dependent on him, and when we asked him for help, he would simply tell us to earn it in the underground. Or you can come to Sullivan's, he would say, inviting the very best Southies to fight in his upscale, above-ground fight club on the east side of Cap. There was no point to this except we put more money in Gray's ever-hungry pockets and proved to him that we would do anything he asked. And that's why he fell in love with my mother, because she was the only Southie smart enough and brave enough to stand up to him. And that was also why he killed her. Do it for Mom. Cody's face appeared in my mind, and I focused. Sound blocked, crowd blocked, fear blocked. I had no idea if I could beat this man, but I knew I had to try. You're my good luck charm. Smile for me, kid. There, now I'll win for sure. For Cody, I whispered to myself, my words lost in the screams of the people. It was one of the most excruciating fights of my life. Every second and every blow could have been my last. But perhaps that was what kept me alive. My heightened senses and clarity of mind. The pain seared my skin and exploded in my nervous system. My bad shoulder jarring as Giant took me and flung me down. Over and over, I got back up. For Cody. Eyes swelling, mouth bleeding, lungs heaving, and shoulders screaming, I kept fighting. I don't know if the crowd went wild when Giant slipped on the blood and sweat on the floor and thudded to the ground, or if they booed to see their champion under a girl. Gripping his head by taking fistfuls of his hair, I hammered my heaviest blows against him until he couldn't fight me off. Weakly, I staggered to my feet and raised a fist into the air. Winner. I could hardly walk, and I hugged my arm against my chest, my bad shoulder unable to hold the weight of it. Hands were ready to catch me and carry me back to safety as soon as I left the ring. No one hugged me this time, but I could hear Ivy crying again. Drink, ordered Finn. He placed it against my bleeding lip. I pulled back, hissing with pain. Come on, Arrow. I can't lose you too. Maybe it was the noise of the crowd that made it sound like his voice cracked as he spoke, but I opened my mouth and gulped down the water, choking and losing most of it down my front. The fights were over, and we could leave. My eyes lifted to heaven as I stumbled out into the fresh air that night, one arm draped around Ivy and the other in Finn's steady grip. For Cody.